And we are rolling live. So today we have a very special treat for you. As I said in the tweet, John and I scoured the internet. We heard you. You guys spoke and we listened. You said, digital Hammurabi, boring, boring, boring. Bible scholars, what is all this? Get us some smart Christians. You got James from Modern Day Debate. That's just not intelligent enough. So John and I scoured the internet, and we found the most intelligent Christian this side of Thomas Aquinas. And she is here live today in our studio. Welcome, please, Esther O'Reilly. And she does imitations, apparently. Billy Joel is something like that. Go ahead. Hello, Esther. Introduce yourself. Say hi to the people.
Hello, people of the interwebs. I am the night. I am Esther. I am brilliant and dark and mysterious. I am the intellectual dark web's annoying kid sister, or so I've been told.
Actually, that's pretty funny. Who told you that?
Paul Vanderklay.
That's good.
Yeah, Paul keeps trying to he keeps trying to figure me out. He's not there yet, but I'm rooting for him.
Put you in a box of the one thing that I noticed, and you can correct me if this is wrong, but this is my impression of you right from the start. You and I are more similar than not. You and I seem to be complete. If I'm wrong, this is the impression I got, that you're completely Christian, but you're also really interested in the Peterson angle.
Oh, totally.
But your interest is from the point of view of Christian, not necessarily a Christian apologist, but as a Christian, this was an interesting phenomenon to you. That's the impression I got.
Yeah, well, not only as a Christian, but I mean, I'm just I call myself a student of human nature, and so I mean, I just love people watching, I guess, and I love characters, and I love to write about interesting, colorful people. Genius, in particular, has always been an attraction for me. I've done some deep dives into talented geniuses of the past, and so Peterson just sort of struck me from the moment I encountered him as this iconic kind of figure. He just had this aura about him, and just the way that he spoke and his personality, I immediately kind of felt a connection. I felt like he and I actually had a lot in common. And so then it's like a year later, and I'm still madly in love, I guess.
Okay, so let's go into your background a little before we go into the full. I want to get the whole deal on your experience with Peterson, your impressions. But let's start with you.
Sure.
Who are you, and what do you do, and why are you doing it?
So I'm at the moment I'm a graduate student in mathematics, and so actually you all kind of caught me at a bad time. I was about to sort of be disciplined and responsible and take a bit of a Twitter fast because it's been getting a little bit out of hand in recent weeks. But so working on that takes up a lot of my time. But I've also been writing for quite a few years. I grew up in a very sort of intellectually active environment. I was encouraged to read voraciously from a very early age. And so I sort of became a critical thinker early on. I was homeschooled. And a little bit more about my particular Christian background, I was raised Anglican, actually. So I've attended a little sort of one-room schoolhouse type Anglican church all my life. But at the same time, I have a very strong sort of evangelical faith. And so there's some interesting tensions and combinations there. I don't really fit into any particular one Christian denomination. Like a lot of times I'll look at a statement of faith and I'll say, well, I agree with some of this, but yeah, I don't go for infant baptism, or, well, I don't go for biblical inerrancy, or I don't go for once saved, always saved, or, or with the Catholics, there's a lot of stuff I don't go for there, even though I think some of their stuff is really cool. So I'm sort of an outlier in that respect. But yeah, I really am just a knowledge omnivore. I love to learn and read about and write about all kinds of different things. And so then even while I'm doing a doctorate in math, really I I walk around in the math department hoping that nobody will realize I'm just a writer pretending to be a mathematician, because words are really what I love and what I think I'm the best at and always have been good at.
Right. So you are actually a freelance writer, though, like a published. I noticed one thing in the Federal.
Yeah, I've had stuff placed with the Federalist, and let's see, the Stream, but that's not like as well known of an outlet. And I've been turned down a few times by Quillette, so there's another claim to fame. And I've also
You've worked with the Unbelievable people, right?
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I've written some for Unbelievable, which is a pretty big outfit over in England. Justin and I are good friends. So actually, it's because of my influence that Justin is going to have Brett Weinstein on for his show in the summer. So you can thank me for that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, everyone.
Their debates are really good. Like they have the one with Jordan Peterson versus Susan Blackmore, I think. And that was an interesting
combination because, see, I mean, that I thought that was funny because Justin typically he'll get a Christian and an atheist, and so that he had the atheist and then whatever Jordan Peterson is on the other side, So, but that ended up actually being a nice dialogue, though. I thought some nice ground was covered there.
Yeah. There was another one that they did recently with Peter Singer versus a Christian, and
Andy Bannister.
Andy Bannister, yeah. Yeah, and that was another like really interesting one because like I used to listen to some of Peterson's early what's it?
Are you guys there?
Yeah.
What happened?
There's two of you.
Dropped out and then you came back in. The other one should probably like drop off on his own.
Craig's duplicated himself. What is this?
Did you do something, John, to correct that, or did this just pop off and pop back
I didn't do it. Yeah, I think it must have been your internet, or it just went out and then you came back on. Your other one should drop off eventually.
Okay, if it happens again, I'll switch to the phone. But so where were we? Okay, so you've written for the Federalist, something that John mentioned.
Yeah, I mentioned that I'd written for Unbelievable, which is Justin Brierley's show out of England, and then we were kind of talking about some of the shows that Justin's done, and John was mentioning a show he liked that where Justin had Peter Singer and Andy Bannister on to debate, and I actually wrote something after that debate as well. I basically schooled Peter Singer in an article I wrote.
Peter Singer's deadly logic takes humans to the cliff's edge. Is that it?
Yeah, that was. And I kind of used Douglas Murray against Peter Singer a little bit, although Douglas didn't know it, of course. But I got on a roll there with that one. That was fun. I can't stand Peter Singer. And I know I have some Christian friends who are philosophers, and one or two who are into ethics. And they'll get like slightly offended when I say something really blunt, like, that Peter Singer's basically a Nazi or something. They'll be like, oh, no, don't compare it to that. He's a very highly respected moral philosopher. And yes, we have our differences, but, I'm like, oh, come on, please. It's just say it. But it's like this sort of guild mentality, I'm like, screw the guild.
Okay. Two questions right from the start. So you were homeschooled, but from what I gather, in your particular case, like I knew a girl who was homeschooled. I knew a couple of people who've been homeschooled who were fundamentalist Christians.
Yeah, I'm a weird homeschooler.
Right. They got a really, really, really bad education. Like they got this really lame, like not, got these, she showed me her reading list and it was like painful and embarrassing. It looks like you got like almost an accelerated college level education as like a young person. That's my guess. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. Although, I want to jump in here. We knew other homeschoolers in our community. And while I was a little unusual in a few different ways, even among homeschoolers, I really want to give props to the friends in my community. They were not unschooling, which is kind of what you're describing there. Friends of mine, they were reading high quality stuff. They were accomplished musicians. They were active in theater. And so it is kind of an urban legend that homeschooling basically is unschooling. There's a vast homeschooling community to whom that would come as news. In fact,
it depends.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, it's sort of a running joke that homeschoolers keep winning all the spelling bees, like all the geography bees and that kind of thing. And so I do want to sort of quickly bust that particular myth. But yeah, even among homeschoolers, I was weird.
Okay, so and then, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's totally different depending on which group of homeschoolers. Like I said, the one person who had an experience with it was like embarrassing. I mean, it's embarrassing a little, and that was a big thing. See, what I sensed in you is that you were well educated, but you've maintained your faith throughout, right? I mean, your faith is real to you, and it's a really important part of your life, from what I've got from the conversation with Paul. So, is that true?
It is true. And I was homeschooled all the way up through high school. So I didn't begin attending public university till I got to college. But I mean, I had kind of already had, like half of a liberal arts degree practically by the time I was, like the literature and history alone, I mean, a lot of stuff was review. So yeah, I accelerated would be a great word to describe it. But then even in college, see, I did something a lot of kids don't do, which is that I kept living at home while attending college. So I didn't do like the full college experience thing where I, slept at the dorms and that kind of thing. So that was helpful as well, because the college was just right in my hometown. So I didn't really have to go away and live at college. And then at college, go ahead.
You never had faith. You never had a faith challenge is the question I was thinking of, because a common atheist thing, they're raised fundamentalist Christian, and it sounds like you were raised somewhat, at least devoutly Christian, if not fundamentalist. I don't know if you'd call yourself that. And then they get educated, and there's some challenge to their faith, and that's what starts the ball rolling. That doesn't seem to have happened to you, right?
No, I was very well prepared. I would definitely not use the word fundamentalist. Both of my folks, they grew up in fundamentalist backgrounds, but that they kind of grew out of that. But they didn't become like bitter ex-fundamentalists. They just sort of matured into more of a C.S. Lewis type Christianity, and joined the Anglican Church and that sort of thing. So they were very highly educated themselves, very intellectual, but still also, quite conservative, and took the Bible seriously. So I would place them in a sort of broadly evangelical tradition, which is different from fundamentalist. A fundamentalist is a more specific kind of subgroup of that. So then I would describe my faith as broadly evangelical in nature, but with Anglican practice. And so I practiced the liturgy and received the sacrament and all that. And so I was also very in touch with that kind of church tradition as well. So I got a very well-rounded experience, I think.
Cool. See, that's what John is, a bitter ex-fundamentalist, right, John? Is that what you're... That's exactly what's interesting, is because this is actually a really rare, especially in these circles. The common myth among the atheists is once you get educated, you become that you walk away from church. And
I didn't get that.
Little stuff. The first thing I noticed about you when you were talking with what's his face, Paul Vanderklay.
What's his face?
That's his face, isn't it?
Dutch guy has a beard.
I was like, wow, this girl's really, really well educated. You could tell immediately, just by some of the references you dropped. I forget if you said on the waterfront. You may have even said on the waterfront. I was like, oh my gosh, she's seen on the waterfront. She knows who Elia Kazan is.
Oh yeah.
Sign her up for my channel.
I was such a huge film buff / nerd growing up. Some of it came out of because I was such a history nerd, and specifically a military history nerd.
Oh, cool.
And I always liked men. I mean, oh no, I'm coming out as heterosexual here, but so I would ask for John Wayne movies for Christmas when I was 9 years old, that kind of thing. And like in high school, I got really into Steve McQueen, and so I would read books on World War II and this sort of thing. So I always had these very, I guess you would call them masculine sorts of interests. So and then also into college in my mid-20s, I got into the history of rock and roll. So I know a lot about music history. It's sort of Americana folk music, folk rock, that whole kind of scene.
Kidding. Like, who did you get into? Listening to, or just like studying up on it? Like,
so Billy Joel, huge. I became a huge fan of him, and then Simon and Garfunkel, and from there Paul Simon, like Simon's whole discography. I just did a deep dive. I tend to sort of do a deep dive into someone when I really become a fan, because I really want to kind of figure out what makes them tick as an artist and get into their catalogs.
That's actually really interesting, because two quick stories. My father did not have a record collection, except he had every single Simon and Garfunkel album, because he just thought they were so brilliant and he loved their music. And actually, I know every one of their albums. I know every song, every lyric. Just like, because I was like a quasi obsessed with them growing up. I still love them. I still listen to them.
Oh, me too. And so then like rock music, like I love Southern rock. So I'm a big fan of all those bands, you know, the Doobie Brothers,
Lynyrd Skynyrd, that type of thing.
Yeah, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Marshall Tucker Band, like all that stuff just goes to the happy part of my brain. But then I also like some Brit rock stuff, so I like some of and I kind of like Phil Collins, although he's not very cool to like, but I think he's an underrated talent, you know. So yeah, I'm a huge musical omnivore as well. So I could basically ramble for hours about any one of a number of topics you wanted to throw at me.
Yeah, I got that. I figured that when I heard you on with Paul. That's why I was like, cool, get this girl on my channel. Like I said, mostly Dumbo's on this channel. No offense to my previous guest, but what was the Brit rock band that you mentioned? Because you cut out right as you said it. Brit rock,
Genesis.
Like what?
Genesis.
Yeah, I was gonna say Paul. What's his face? Phil Collins is people only think of the wussy like pop Phil Collins that was popular in America in the 80s, but the people who know from Genesis have a lot more respect for him. And what's his face too? What's Peter Gabriel? Peter Gabriel's actually really good. I still listen to Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are. What are you now? Are you kind of an evangelist and freelance writer taking classes? Is that how you would? Are you interested in evangelism? Are you still like connected with your faith? How does that work?
Well, you know, I didn't exactly set out to turn this into an evangelistic thing. I set out to observe it as a writer, I guess. And then, as I connected with Paul Vanderklay and began connecting with some of his listeners, I kind of realized, wow, there's a story here that's bigger than Peterson in a sense. That there are all these ripple effects, because, you know, a lot of people when they first encounter Peterson, they see him in political terms or in a sort of culture war type terms. But I pretty quickly realized that he was bigger than that. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's all these guys who suddenly want to have conversations about the Bible and Jesus and stuff. I guess I should have some of those with them. So it's
right. You actually called him in one of your things a once in a generation figure. I thought that was an interesting. That was you,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, that was me. Yeah, and so I've begun sort of connecting with some of his fans and having those conversations, and it's been like I've never had so many opportunities to share my faith before. So, you know, for the past few years, I haven't really been. I'm not like super assertive about my faith. I mean, I don't hide it or anything, but I don't sort of go around knocking on people's doors, I guess. But what I realized with Peterson is that now all these people are sort of knocking on the church's doors, so to speak. So I'm just sort of acting as a door greeter, I guess, is how I see myself now. And it's also opened up conversations in person, like at school. There's this guy I knew for a couple of years, really nice guy. And then I'm like, wait a minute, are you a Peterson fan too? Because like he mentioned Peterson, so we're like, oh, you too. That's awesome, man. So then we've begun connecting over that and having great conversations about religious stuff and in light of that. So I couldn't have asked for a better evangelistic opportunity, I guess, even though I didn't necessarily set out to turn it into one.
Okay, so what's your operating theory? We got a good sense of the background, right? So we can go to the Peterson.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sure.
So what is your operating theory on, I noticed you wrote about it a lot. What is your operating theory on why the connection? Why are people responding to him the way they are? In briefest possible way, or what do you think the most important thing about it is?
Well, It's hard to be brief because there's so many factors at work.
Then be lengthy. Brief doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We got plenty of time. John, we got time, right? She can be as lengthy as she wants.
Let me check the watch. Yeah, we got time.
Okay. Well, to begin with, I think Brett Weinstein really nailed it when he said there's a void of authenticity in our culture. And so, like, here comes Peterson. He's this rough Alberta kind of guy, and he's just like a 100% no BS kind of guy. You know, he says exactly what he means, not always with the maximum amount of tact, but, you know, people love him for that. And also he's all in, you know, like he's completely passionate and fully personally invested in what he's saying. And so then he's
right.
real.
Let me just interrupt you briefly. One of the things you said in your writing, which I thought was spot on, about how the church can be really, really, really fake. And when they start talking about it, like Peterson sometimes wears his emotions on his sleeves, but when the church is doing it, it's fake emotionalism to try and produce a result in like the attendee.
Yes.
And Peterson doesn't do it that way at all. Go ahead.
Exactly. Right. It can be. So that was in my post, 5 lessons Jordan Peterson has taught the church. And I want to be, I try to be as gracious to everybody as possible. And so I don't want this to come off like a church bashing thing. Like, I don't necessarily think
church
that
sucks. Church sucks. Church sucks.
Exactly. So, I
you
don't
necessarily. You can bash church for Christians. It's in-house bashing. You can bash church freely.
Right. So
you're not doing it like an atheist. You're not saying like, you can go ahead. Feel free.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, to sort of refine that a little bit, it's not that I think all of the Christians who come off as fake are bad or manipulative people necessarily. I think it's just it's like a meme, I guess, and it's a certain vibe, a kind of a church culture that's grown up that the people just fall into, and I can see how for somebody,
some of it is
for
definitely
someone walking in. It can be pretentious, or it's just weird, for somebody walking in for the first time. At some of the jargon and the catchphrases that are used, it's kind of odd. And then with emotionalism, because I'm a music buff, and I really hate most Christian music these days. It just sucks. You're just making rock and roll worse. Is that how the cartoon goes? Yeah. At these worship songs, like, oh, draw me close to you, Jesus. I want to feel your warm embrace. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Repeat 50 times. It's like, this sucks. It's just,
you're not buying it. You're not buying it.
This is awful, man. And then Peterson gets up and he's like, okay, kids, life is suffering. Buckle up. Okay, now that gets people's attention. And so. But right, like I was emphasizing, it's not that Peterson is just a drill sergeant type. He's actually surprisingly sensitive as well, and that was brings me to another aspect of his appeal, I think, which is his depth of experience working with people. You could tell he deeply cares about his audience, and he deeply cares about the patients that he's had in his clinical practice. And he's, I would say he's a true lover of mankind, and when people come up to him and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you. He's like, you're not bothering me. And he really means it. He's not just saying that. He's like actually thrilled to meet total strangers and listen to their stories. And so that's incredibly moving. And, sometimes I think that may have been a little bit what Jesus was like, that he connected with people everywhere he went. There was just something about him that kind of drew people to him. So not that I'm saying Peterson is the second coming of Jesus or anything.
I was just going to say, I was going to make a joke about it. I was trying to figure out.
Yeah. It's very tempting.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
You get what I mean.
We're totally in. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's sincere, he's kind, he's compassionate, but he's also tough. And he's speaking to men.
He's tough-minded. The thing about Peterson, there are a couple of aspects of Peterson that are revolutionary. the tough-minded, the fact that he's not like, I've said this in one of my videos, he's not Nietzsche, and he's not Dostoevsky, he's not a once-in-a-generation genius. What he is, though, is a very intelligent person, equal to Sam Harris, let's say, but a product.
Oh no, far superior, man.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm not keeping score. I'm just saying, like, Sam Harris will blow a lot of people out of the water, and Peterson very easily held his own in those debates, and debatably won, but without any real struggle on Peterson. There was no real. It was basically Peterson just talking, doing his Peterson thing. And his thing is actually really, really intellectually substantial. That in and of itself is revolutionary because he was raised in the educational system. So he's got a really deep background. When you look at his reading list, it's pretty thorough. It's pretty.
I could add some things to it, but yeah.
I could definitely add. There's some things that are surprisingly not there, but it's really thorough in terms of a modern day, public figure. Forget it. It's light years ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, right. And I think so. Then, as far as what he's communicating, I would say he's like the archetypal noble pagan. He's the archetypal stoic figure who, maybe there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but by God, I'm going to put one bloody foot in front of the other, and be noble and be virtuous. Damn it, and and make the most of it. And so there's so much wisdom there. There's like hard-earned, lived wisdom. You could tell that he personally has struggled with a lot of suffering in his own life, and with clinical depression, And so then he's weathered it, and he brings that sort of weathered, lived experience, and it has weight. It lands with authority. And young men lack that kind of strong, masculine authority figure to kind of put the hand on your shoulder and say, hey, kid, there's some things that aren't so great about you, but here's what you could be. Here's a goal to aim for. Now go, go for it. Go get it. Men need that so desperately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what made him stand out, especially for this generation, is how he doesn't come at things kind of from the same, I guess, framework or direction as like most theologians or Christians do, where there's kind of this already built like framework of process and reasoning and how to go about things from within the Christian framework. And so he comes at it kind of more from the, I guess, standard secular, scientific, rigorous empiricism of today's standard. And I think that kind of reached out to a lot of people in that this was kind of the, I guess, the norm for a lot of, especially countries in a lot of the Western countries, like in the UK, where Christianity is such kind of a nominal, if anything. And so.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I've got a couple friends in the Netherlands now. My friend Joe, who you might have seen, heard about on Twitter, said a couple episodes with Paul. Job's hilarious, man, and he's just started reading the Gospels for the first time, and he keeps like DMing me like his running commentary on the Gospels, and it's hilarious. It's so great, but he's loving it, man. But it's so sad to think, oh yeah, that's post-Christian Europe for you. It's like these people are growing up, and yeah.
But that's exactly what.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's exactly what made Peterson revolutionary. He was raised, he was basically educated like he was Sam Harris, taught psychology, neuroscience, things like that. And it was a pretty standard, pretty thorough education. And he started coming at Christianity from that point of view.
Yeah.
So like what John is saying is like, you have someone like William Lane Craig, who's obviously bright, but he's been raised up in apologetics. So it's really unconvincing to people who aren't on the page. It just doesn't work.
I have quite a few thoughts about this too, and a piece an article is maybe gestating here. I might call it "Has Apologetics Failed?" or something eye-catching like that. Yeah.
Oh, who's in the chat, John? Stephanie Kerr. Give Stephanie a round.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Is Stephanie there?
That's okay though. That's I'm actually going to say some stuff that SJ might like. But so here's the deal, I think, with Peterson and with William Lane Craig. I think we need both of them.
I agree.
I think what Peterson is you need a guy like Peterson to sort of be in between and to sort of make people want Christianity to be true first. Because I think, you know, and I got a wonderful note from a guy who's actually become a Christian now, but he was like a hardcore, angry internet atheist for a number of years. And then he had some family tragedy in his background as well. It got into substance abuse and all kinds of stuff. So listening to Peterson helped him kick that, you know, kind of lifted him out of that morass. And at the same time, he said Peterson was sort of convicting him about some of his character flaws, like, gee, maybe I'm not so hot stuff. Maybe I'm kind of arrogant and prideful and I need to work on myself. And so then that sort of prepared the ground, sort of humbling him. And then he said he began to circle back around to the William Lane Craigs, those kinds of things, and thought, you know, William Lane Craig doesn't sound like such an idiot anymore. You know, like Peterson had kind of like opened his heart, in a sense, to actually listen to what William Lane Craig was saying, and it began sort of clicking. He's like, okay, now I get it. This is fitting together, and I think Craig is actually kind of smoking these atheists that he's debating, and this whole God thing makes sense, and I guess I'm ready to take the next step. Then he also had kind of a personal experience where he felt like God had answered his prayer. So putting that all together, now he considers himself like a bona fide Christian, and not just like a Christian atheist, but a Christian Christian. So that's kind of the ideal trajectory, I would think. So
are you sorry?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Are you aware of Jonathan Haidt and his like the elephant and its rider? It could maybe be kind of put as like Peterson is somebody that like for
the elephant trader.
Yeah, exactly. For the like Sam Harris followers, he's somebody that is kind of disillusioned them of the idea that religion is always harmful, and so from that, people can get a good understanding of like, oh, okay, there's actual like functions that religious thinking has, and then from
exactly.
that,
right. And I do want to say one quick thing about William Lane Craig here, in particular. I think of Craig primarily as a philosopher rather than a theologian. You know, a number of the arguments that he makes kind of fall into what you might call natural theology sort of things. So like the Kalam cosmological argument, for example. I mean, like completely atheist secular philosophers talk about that kind of problem all the time. So, you know, Craig's very professional, you know, and he's very, very rigorous and very sharp. And so, you know, I definitely would not put Craig in the same category as somebody like Ken Ham, for example.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No,
and so,
definitely.
Right. But the thing with Craig is that he's you know, he's very cerebral, and he's sort of laser focused on these philosophical things. And so, you know, he doesn't bring the sort of life coach aspect, and he doesn't bring the same sort of charisma or passion that Peterson does with that sort of fresh way of looking at Christianity. And a lot of people have just sort of already imbibed this notion that that Christianity is stupid. And so like I'm just repeating myself, but
not only that, but also kind of the idea that philosophy itself is kind of stupid, because like once you have science, then philosophy is just kind of like, oh, what we did before we had science to actually learn the actual mechanisms behind how everything works.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, my take on this might be is that I wouldn't say that William Lane Craig has failed. I would just say that he's doing a different kind of thing from what Peterson is doing, and that you kind of a person needs each of them at different stages. So in a sense, Peterson's for the people who aren't ready for William Lane Craig yet.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Well, Peterson is also, let me see what you think of this. Before I became a Christian, I was in my 20s, I was starting to become intellectually convinced that there was a God. And it was really strange because I was actually reading a lot of the same things that Peterson talks about. Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Jung. Jung in particular was starting to push the Tao Te Ching, which Peterson has mentioned. So I was starting to become convinced intellectually there was a God, as opposed to a faith experience. And I'm almost, how I would talk is almost exactly how Peterson talks now. Sometimes I'd be like, yes, there's a God. Sometimes I'd be like, no, depending on the mood I was in. But it's almost like Peterson is organically coming to a place of, like, he organically came to the realization that Christianity has social utility. That was an organic conclusion based on his study and his research. And that's where it's more like William Lane Craig, he's in the church, he's in the fold. You know what I mean? So some of his arguments are based off of what convinced you. There's very little of that in Jordan Peterson. It's,
right. Well,
he started to become convinced himself.
Right. And technically, Jordan Peterson grew up United Church of Canada, but you know, here my evangelical snobbery is going to come out. That ain't no church, man. That's just
that's not even a church. It's a joke.
It's a country club for old people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, I doubt that he got any kind of. I mean, you know, he talks about the dishonest pastors, right? The guys didn't even believe what they were preaching. So I don't really consider him as having any real Christian background to speak of.
When you're raised nominally religious like that, like I was raised nominally Roman Catholic, and it's not, you weren't necessarily, like I wasn't necessarily expected to believe any of it. People would have been really surprised if I had. It's probably the same idea with him. I don't know that for a fact, but just go ahead.
There's a guy you should look up. He does satirical videos. His alter ego is Stanford Nutting, and he's got one where there's a Christmas party and he's trying to talk to his zoned out Catholic nephew who's been confirmed, and he's like, "What are they teaching you? Tell everyone. What are you learning at Catholic school?" Jesus was nice. You be nice too. You know. So yeah, that's not catechesis in my book.
Yeah.
So yeah, Peterson's coming at this as an outsider. You know, that's the intrigue. You know, that's the mystery of it. And I get it. You know, well, and it's sort of like on a grand ideological scale, the same phenomenon as, you know, mom told you to clean your room a bajillion times, but then Peterson comes and tells you to clean your room, and all of a sudden it's sexy and cool and you clean your room. So something similar might be happening on a larger scale with Peterson telling you to read the Bible. You know, it's like, well, you know, my pastor told me to read the Bible, but he's my pastor. Of course, that's what he would say, you know. But Peterson says, hey, read your Bible. It's like, oh, maybe there's something in there, you know.
I think what's most funny is how, like, when Peterson talks to some of his followers and things like that, he always seems surprised at how people have, like, turned towards actually believing in Christianity instead.
I wanted to talk about. I have so many thoughts about that. I think that's hilarious. Totally predictable, but hilarious.
Exactly, because, like, I think for Peterson's own position, like, it seems like that's almost. I don't know. It seems like he's perfectly content kind of doing his own, like, personal religion, I guess, personal church, like, without having
Church of one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, right.
Yeah,
the way I put it.
That, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the way I put it on Twitter is, actually it was a friend of mine who put it this way on Twitter. It'd be like someone came up and said, hey, you know, I've been listening to your lectures on Pinocchio, and I've got this puppet in my basement, and I think it actually gets up and walks around at night now. Like, I'm convinced, man. You convinced me. And Peterson's like, oh, well, whatever works for you, man. I mean, it's a step up from nihilism.
Actually, that's a decent Jordan Peterson imitation. What's going on with that?
Oh, that sucked. I've got I could do better, but
that's way better than John's. It's way better than John's.
Tell me to clean my room.
Clean your damn room, man.
Clean your damn room, man. That's better than I could do.
Yep. Yeah.
That was the first time I've ever tried it. All right, so wait.
You're contending with chaos, and every time you clean your room, you're saving Western civilization.
That's definitely good. That's definitely
Yeah.
Anyway,
that Pinocchio point is so funny, because that makes a lot more sense. Like, his mindset, I guess, because it's so funny how he's like surprised almost every single time it happens.
Well, this is what I keep coming to with Peterson, but I find it enormously amusing to watch, and I'm just sort of letting this play itself out, take its time. There are two Jordan Petersons. There's Jungian. Well, now I take that back because Jung didn't believe any of this stuff either, like not really. So, but so there's, I guess you could say, the God curious Jordan Peterson. The Jordan Peterson who, when Sam Harris goes, come on, let's be real here. You don't really believe Jesus rose from the dead, right? And Peterson's like, he's like not willing to say no. But then there's there's modernist Jordan Peterson who's like, oh my God, just say no. Because like all of Peterson's like scientific training and psychological training, because he comes out of the secular academy where it's just taken for granted. If you want to be a Christian, have that be your private little faith thing. Fine, but nobody thinks this is actually rational. Nobody thinks this actually makes sense. It's just your private little belief. And so there's all of that to Peterson, where he's never really looked at Christianity as a thing that literally happened in history. He's been too busy sort of keying it into this archetypal Jungian type framework, like, oh, here's another dying and rising God, cool, here's another virgin birth, that's another pattern, that it's part of this pattern of stories we all tell each other, blah blah blah. And so that's sort of his security blanket, if I could put it that way. That's his grand Jungifying theory of everything.
I think he's like read too much Dostoevsky to actually like take materialism as his full foundation, because he realizes just how far that can go down. Like the ramifications of, I guess, of that, like of nihilism kind of being the necessary like rational conclusion to materialism. And so I think he follows more in the Dostoevsky camp, where I think Dostoevsky said something like, if
God is not allowed, all is permitted, or if God doesn't exist, all is permitted.
Well, that too, like in order to avoid all is permitted, there's kind of the agnosticism towards God. But also something else Dostoevsky said, like, if it turned out that Jesus could not fit within the realm of truth, I would reject the truth in order to retain Jesus.
Well, that gets to Peterson's idea of truth's more true than the literal, right? There's you have your objective scientific truth over here, and then you have your metaphorical truth over there. And the drum that I'm always pounding is that that's an artificial split. There's actually
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I get it. I understand why he does it, because certain presuppositions about the way the world works and the way reality is are so baked in, especially in the kind of circles where Peterson runs, that you do sort of throw up your hands in despair, and you do sort of think, well, gee, yeah, if this really is how it is, then I can't really make a scientific case. Oh, and I could go on about the definition of science and how everyone gets that wrong too. But that, like, well, I guess scientifically I couldn't really prove this, but damn it, we all act like it's true. So yeah, screw science. Let's just go with how people actually are.
What you actually hit on is the false part of the that's a debate that's being worked out in a way that's actually fake, because it's subtle. But like, for example, with Brett Weinstein, where he says his version of metaphorical truth is something that is literally false.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a little too much. It doesn't have to be literally false. It can be just not exactly true in every situation. Literally false means and that's what Peterson is defending against, is like there's a hyper rationalism that he was raised in the university and things like that takes as a starting point that rationality excludes God. Now he is actually bridging that gap organically. See, it wasn't an organic thing. It was an agenda-driven thing.
But except right.
Go ahead.
Except what's funny about it is that I don't know if he necessarily is trying to bridge the gap.
He's not trying to bridge the gap, but that's why he's so effective at it.
Right. Well, that's also why he's so sort of flustered when people say, "Hey, I'm actually a Christian now." It's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's like, because he himself is not there. He himself is still working this through.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I don't know if he's actually working his way through, but it seems like he's found the position that he's comfortable with, like his own personal middle position where he can believe things that are abstractly true to be more real than things that are, like, let's say, particularly true.
Yeah, but I think it still bugs him, though. Like I wrote in my unbelievable piece about the resurrection, which I'm really proud of that piece. That's like one of the best freaking things I ever wrote. But going back to that first, like, old interview with Tim Lott, like when he was first sort of caught off guard about the resurrection and he hadn't like prepared his little pat answer yet for it, which he's given about 50 times since then. And he says, I refuse to. He something like, I'm unwilling to close the door on the idea that there really is a life after death, that good actually does triumph over evil and those kinds of things. And you could tell, like, at that moment, he's talking about, like, what I believe, you know, that it's not just like, oh, well, you act as if da-da-da. He's saying, I don't want to rule out the idea that all of this could actually be true, but I'm trying to get my thoughts in order because I don't really understand this. And that's kind of what he said to me when I met him at a VAP. And I had kind of a long, rambly question, unfortunately, but he, you know, he gave me a sort of similar answer to what he said to Patrick Hoff. And he goes, I'm still trying to work out the connection between the metaphorical and the real. And I don't understand it yet. But I want to understand it more.
This is what I was trying to get at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you're an actual Christian, correct? Like I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fake Christian. You're not like, I think John might be a wussy, like, kind of in between, like, metaphorical truths, kind of work in society type Christian. I don't know. I can't tell. So you're an actual.
I thought he said he was.
I'm not sure. I think he comes in and out of it too. I think he kind of like.
No, I was raised as a Messianic Jew, so, and then from out of that, I don't know where I am right now. I'd say I
knew it.
Yeah, and no, I'm not like as far as Peterson. Like I'm still a fully, like, theist. I like playing around with the philosophical arguments for God, but I do think that there are certain
problems.
Problems
with God's existence.
This might be some of the disagreements that I've had with you, Esther, on Twitter, like the I guess limits of rationality and the limits of the more the rationale kind of worldview where truths can be known and sorry, that's getting off topic though.
Okay, so wait. But so Peterson is in the middle, and as far as John said, which I agree with, doesn't look to me like Peterson really cares. Like, people make a big deal of it because we got two camps, theist, atheist, and they're fighting over what he actually says.
No, he doesn't give a damn. Yeah, no.
Right. That's why he's exactly where I was when I was 26. I really didn't care. I was just like, sometimes I would believe if I were in the right mood. You know, I've just watched like Little Drummer Boy and be like, yeah, there's definitely a God. And then I'm home the next Sunday and I'm like, no, there definitely isn't. I didn't really care, though. It wasn't that. It's very different than being a Christian.
Yeah.
And Peterson is not a Christian like me and Esther.
Yeah.
And
it might be the case that he's softening more in his positions, because I know in a couple of his like recent conversations that he's had, like somebody asked him, like, is it enough for people to act as if there is a God or actually believe it? And he's kind of went into like, no, I think they actually need to believe it, because that kind of, like, they need to actually have it within themselves. He didn't go into it fully, but I think he brought up, the question was like whether or not somebody could pretend to believe in God or actually believe in God.
Well, and it was about meaning. That was the Haaretz interview. And he's like, do we need meaning, or can we just have the illusion of meaning? And Peterson's like, no, you need meaning, like real meaning. Which, you know, it's interesting. You could sort of swap God in for meaning and let that marinate a little bit. I think, you know, somebody asked the best question I've ever heard anyone ask Peterson was actually just somebody in a Q&A. after his talk with Matt Dillahunty. Somebody asked him, maybe this will help. Do you think that if everyone on the planet disappeared, that God would still be there? And Peterson like paused for a really long time and said, I can't really, well, it's really complicated.
Questions don't help because Peterson just gives an elaborate, like 15-hour, really thought out answer that frustrates everybody even more.
Here's the thing, because I figured this out while I was researching my my essay for this anthology of essays that's going to come out. I began reading some Jung, and like some of the correspondence that Jung had, and I kind of put it all together. And I figured out what Peterson meant when he was talking about, he kept talking about consciousness in that answer, which I thought was odd because I wasn't sure how this was all connecting up. And I think I would use the word maybe panentheistic. Yeah. Peterson, basically, he's saying, so there's a letter from Jung where Jung says, we, people, we are the consciousness of God. So the supreme being is unconscious. And it's like he sort of needs us to be his eyes and ears, so to speak, which is this like weird, creepy, almost sci-fi-ish way to think about it. But
in I think his Adam and Eve one, he talks about how the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was like giving them knowledge of the future, and through that they, or actually it might have also been in his book 12 Rules for Life, but how like the vision of we attain the vision of God by being able to look backwards into the past, whereas like prior to that all we have is kind of our conscious like pulling us one way or the other, and it's only after we actually act can we like realize what we've done that was wrong. And so it definitely it's I think you're right. His perspective makes a lot more sense coming kind of like interpreting him as kind of that, or like there's a spirit within every single person that is part of the spirit of God, and that I guess amalgamation can be abstracted out, and then you can get a kind of clearer picture of like what God is as a living organism.
Right, and it also helps sync up with his view of Christ. So I still think that, you know, even when he plays with the idea that Christ might actually have risen from the dead, I still don't think he's really conceiving of it the way that Christians would think of resurrection, because he says, well, I mean, who knows what we're capable of? Like, I don't know what happens when you get the balance between life and death exactly right. Like, you know, any of us could be able to sort of
see, that statement makes no sense from like a hardcore materialist at all. like that.
No, it doesn't.
That's something that I don't think he even really understands. I don't know. Maybe he does.
Yeah, but what I was connecting to Jung was when Jung talks about Christ, Jung explicitly distances himself from the Orthodox Christian view that Christ was the only incarnation of God on earth. And Jung goes, but I think we're all incarnations of God. So instead of Christ being the one true God-man, we're all like little God-men running around.
And that kind of goes into how Peterson talks about like how each person must take on the cross or they must imitate Christ in their present moment, like in your personal location and your personal time. That's how you must live out the archetype of the Son of God, I guess.
Well, exactly. And, you know, there's a sense of that, which I, as a Christian, would say, absolutely, I'm on board with that. But the way he conceives of it is, when he says spark of divinity, I'm like, say more. Like, what do you mean by that? And so it turns out that it's like each of us is sort of bringing our little candle to light the fire that is the collective unconscious, which is the consciousness of God. And at that point, I'm like, okay, now we're into Jungian La La Land.
We're in Woo Land. But that's the problem with Jung is like 85% of it is like woo nuttiness.
Exactly.
There's a core of it that's actually scientific. That's the part that's been regurgitated through Peterson or refound through him.
Right. Jung is woo plus LSD.
Right. But so okay, so when what was I gonna say?
Sorry.
So in the debate with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, you watched all three, correct?
Oh, I watched it.
Four.
Wait, weren't there four?
Yeah,
4. Yeah. Okay, so you watched all 4. Now, one of the things that I said already, but I'll try to clarify. See, Peterson is on stage, and he's arguing with, like, you know, a respectable scientific mind. You can think Sam Harris isn't all that, but he's a public right, but he's a public intellectual, for better or for worse, in American society today. And Jordan Peterson is easily holding his own. And 85% of everything they talk about, they're in agreement on. And those are the scientific realities that Peterson has been raised in. So the new spin that Peterson is bringing is he's kind of solving an inorganic process. When Darwin came out, you know, science and religion completely split into two separate, supposedly warring camps. And Peterson is reconciling those two. And the fact that he doesn't quite believe in God makes him a lot more effective as an authentic voice of reconciliation. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Oh, yeah, I think sociologically that makes complete sense. And, you know, it's Paul Vanderklay keeps using the analogy of Peterson trying to build something, and Sam comes along, knocks the blocks over, like, no, I don't want to play. I don't want to do that. I don't want to build that project. And so, you know, I come at this from a wholly different perspective, I guess. Because you know, and if you read my own debate write-up, which blew up on Patheos, and Peterson tweeted it out and everything, and it was all very exciting. And I got a fan note from Michael Shermer, which I could talk about a little bit later on.
You didn't tell me that? I didn't.
Yeah, Michael Shermer wrote me a fan note, so I could talk about that a bit later. But so
Peterson has been watching videos, I'm pretty sure.
So in my own analysis of the debates, I sympathized with both Harris and Peterson in a sense. Like I really could see where both of them are coming from. And I think there are areas where Peterson really just nails Harris to the wall. So, you know, just the emptiness of Harris's view, like there were all these deterministic puppets walking around. I mean, Peterson just blows that out of the water, I think, quite elegantly. And also Harris's extraordinary naivete about morality. Like, oh, come on, guys, morality is really easy. See, it's all about measuring well-being. And Peterson's like, yeah, no. You know, like, that well-being thing, man, it's a non-starter. You know,
that was much better.
Right.
That was awesome. That was really good.
He's absolutely right. He's totally right. It is a non-starter. And you know, he's like, look at the Holocaust. Actually think about the Holocaust. And so, you know, Harris just doesn't get that. He doesn't understand that. There's like a module in Sam's brain that's like missing that Peterson is bringing. But
because this is
yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I was just going to say this is This is how I see Sam Harris. What's going on is that he kind of has to dogmatically route the conversation back to, oh, but religion sucks. He can't just go with where Peterson is taking him and go, you are right, there's sociological utility to religion, which Mac Dillahunty kind of did. He can't just go, I accept this. He has to keep routing it back to, but here's the thing you're forgetting, though, Peterson. I agree with 85% of what you just said, but here's what you're forgetting. Religion sucks. Because Muslims make women wear bags on their heads and they throw gays out of windows. You know, he has to keep bringing it back to his dogma.
But
that's why.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Let me steel man Sam for a sec, though. So
go ahead. Go for it.
So I kind of did this in my post too, but here's where I actually think Sam is right and Peterson is wrong, and where I think Harris actually was making an important point is that he kept saying, we actually do want, like truth is better than noble fiction, though, I guess is what Sam was trying to articulate there. And so there's this place where he's saying, are you trying to say that stupid people need their myths? Which is this sort of a nasty way of putting it. And so then Peterson tried to kind of deflect, like, well, we're all stupid, you know, like, what the hell do you know, that kind of thing. But I think Sam was making a good point there. It's like, I want to try to be as honest as I can with people, that I really don't think any of this stuff is actually true. I don't think any of this stuff actually happened. And so Sam feels weird about, you know, in essence telling people, go ahead, like, just go on believing it. It's just better for you. It's just better that way. He wants to, you know, he wants to say, no, let's try to see if we can understand the truth, because people should have good reasons for what they believe. And I agree with Sam. I think people should have good reasons for what they believe.
Yeah.
Now, there is this. There is a system.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It kind of goes into what we had just mentioned, how Peterson was talking about how you need actual meaning rather than the belief in meaning, something like that. And so that's exactly kind of Sam's point, that people need to know they need to actually know that what they're doing is true, rather than just believing things just because it's useful.
Right. Now, what's interesting to me about Eric Weinstein, Eric will just right out use the phrase noble fiction or noble lie. And so I think his use of that phrase sort of elegantly cuts through all the hours of talk between Harris and Peterson, because neither Harris nor Peterson used that phrase exactly. But that, I think, essentially is what was being danced around on all those nights. Like, is a noble lie better, in the grand scheme of things? And Eric will say yes. He'll say, because Eric is a self-described unhappy naturalist. He's sort of scared of where naturalism might lead if you actually followed its conclusions out. And so he's like, look, if a noble lie keeps Western civilization from spiraling into chaotic, self-destructive nihilism, let's go with the noble lie. I'm happy with that. And so that's kind of what Peterson is saying without putting it in quite so many words, I think. But that's what bugs Harris, I think.
Right. Well, that was actually, by the way, that was excellent steel manning of Sam Harris. Excellent. That's almost 100% what the validity of his objection actually is that if there's any validity, that's it, is that he's saying it's got to be true. It's not enough that it's metaphorically true, whatever that means. It's got to be actually true in order for people to ground their beliefs in. But where it gets confusing, and this is why it's better for Peterson not to be a Christian, is that there's a lot of it. This is where Brett Weinstein was unhelpful by saying metaphorically true, by calling it a noble fiction, saying it's something that's literally false, isn't helpful, because Peterson is trying to ground Western civilization in transcendental ethic. God doesn't have to exist for that ethic to be totally valuable and totally useful and completely true. God doesn't have to exist for Jesus doesn't have to have risen from the dead for the way, like, remember the Bishop Barron take on Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, but he's talking about Kant and Lessing's ditch and stuff.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Where okay, so Jesus is just a representation of the ideal man that you follow out to be more ethically sound. There's a way of circling the square without it being literally true. That's my only point. Go ahead.
So I think you have to distinguish between epistemology and ontology here. So
that's why that's why you're here, to do that for us. I don't even know what you mean. Go ahead.
So epistemology is has to do with knowing or getting things, perceiving things, grasping things, and ontology has to do with how those things are grounded in terms of their existence. So the way I would rephrase or kind of respin what you're saying right there, because I'm a big fan of natural law, which is like, let's just sort of ask nature some questions and listen really carefully to her answers, and then try to follow what she's trying to tell us. Because I think that nature reveals things to us even before we go and consult the Bible. I think that nature reveals things about the purpose of man and the design of men and women and the complementarity of men and women, and all these different kinds of things, many of which Peterson is sort of picking up on with his project. So without consulting the special revelation of the Bible, he's saying, let's look at the book of nature, let's look at natural revelation and kind of see where this takes us. And so when you think about like a guilty conscience, we all have that. We all have a conscience that when we do wrong, Jiminy Cricket is in our ear going, psst, you shouldn't have done that. And so Peterson talks a lot about that. And so I think what I would say is you can perceive, okay, something is there. Like I just know that the Nazis were wrong. I may not be a Christian, but I sure as hell know that Hitler was wrong.
Right.
So
exactly.
But then the question is, okay, but where is this gut instinct coming from? Like, how do I fit this into an evolutionary framework, let's say, because it still doesn't seem to make sense unless there's some a referent, unless there's like an agent or a being that's sort of grounding all of this.
Right, but that's where you start to get the really important questions that Peterson asks himself, and those questions point you to God, John.
Yes, yeah,
John,
get with it,
agnostic man. John. I know.
What are you guys doing? This isn't right.
We're preaching to you. We're Jesus smuggling. We're Jesus smuggling.
Those questions asked correctly, framed correctly, point you to the living God. Now, Sam Harris would 150% disagree with that, and that's part of his defensiveness against Peterson. But is it a war against the truth, Esther? Go ahead.
It is a war against the truth, and I also think too, you know, I could not get through Maps of Meaning. I read like about a quarter of it and was just like, I'll finish this later. And
listen to the YouTube. It's great on YouTube.
It is. Yeah, it's better on YouTube. I listened to most of that. And there's a great analogy. I don't know if you've seen any of Alistair Roberts' stuff. He was a guest on Paul's channel a while back. Very bright guy, a British theologian. He's an excellent
I read
writer.
It through you. It's one of your links. I read 30% of it on Friday night.
So
yes, go ahead.
I think he did read all of Maps of Meaning, actually, and he came up with a good analogy for Peterson's project. He talked about the ancient astronomer Ptolemy. So Ptolemy, living back in Egypt, everyone still thought that the sun went around the Earth. So he sat down and he thought, okay, I'm going to try to map the motions of the planets in the solar system. So he set out to try to create this, but then he started running into problems like, oh, shoot, this isn't like on time. This isn't coming around where it should be. Well, how about if I draw a little extra loop over here? That'll sync everything back up. Okay, but then a little while later, he runs into another problem. Oh, shoot. Well, okay, I'll draw another little loop. Like, you know, so these little loops, they were called epicycles that these planets were taking. And pretty soon, he just had a big old mess of a map with all these little extra loops and epicycles that were sort of like shoehorned in after the fact to try to patch his system. But because nobody at the time questioned the idea that the sun went around the Earth, you know, he just had to sort of keep blundering on. Mm-hmm. And so then, fast all the way forward to Kepler. Kepler comes along and he says, it's actually really simple. They go around in an ellipse, like an oval. And it's elegant, and it's clean, and it's neat, and it solves everything using the Copernican system now that the sun is in the center of the solar system. So reading Maps of Meaning, Alistair said this, and I think this is perfect. Alistair said he felt it's kind of like Ptolemy's Epicycles. Peterson's project really is kind of a leaky boat. There's really a lot of patches and problems in it, but he keeps trying to sort of fix it, like a little bit of Darwin over here, some Jungian stuff over here, some myth making over there, and a little, well, I don't really know what the hell is going on here, but maybe I'll figure it out later, you know? And I feel like coming at it as a Christian, I want to bring him the ellipses of Kepler, so to speak. But first he's got to put the sun in the center of the solar system, and I'm trying really hard not to make a super cheesy pun here, but you know, I could. You know, it's like he has to put Jesus at the center, you know. Right. And I don't think he's ready to do that yet. I still think he's trying to hammer out his epicycles, and it just takes time because it's his life's work, you know. And you don't just go, well, looks like my entire life's work was based on a flawed presupposition and just give it up. I mean, that's hard. Like, he might never do that, and I don't know. It'll just be fascinating to watch.
So was that the gist of your open letter to him? It was kind of a plea. Am I reading that correctly? It was a plea to be what?
Yes, it's in some sense that was
more Christian to find the Lord and stop this scientific gobbledygook and find Jesus.
Well, you know,
scientific bull crap.
You know, to be clear, I love science.
No, I know.
Yes, science is the bomb. But yeah, no, now that letter, I was in like full sort of high flown artistic literary gear. And so, a lot of people that letter is not really their cup of tea. And I understand that, but I worked in a lot of sort of literary references and actually gave that to him when I met him. He's probably never read it. But yeah, so my plea is that I think Christianity brings everything together. It brings all the pieces together. It brings together the longing, and all the heart stuff and the good and evil and the epic stuff and the true myth and all that lovely stuff that C.S. Lewis goes on about. But it also makes sense. I think it also makes rational sense. And I think that if you gave up what I think is an unhelpful definition of the scientific method and actually sort of explored where I think science really leads you, it would begin to sort of fit together. But it requires, to use a Jungian phrase, burning away some dead wood to sort of get you there. And I don't know I think he's still hanging on to some of that.
Okay, so let me drill down on that for a sec, because I think it's kind of brilliant what you just said. Don't mean to flatter you, but
I thank you. Thank you, Charles.
Well, I totally understand where you're going with this, and I think you're totally on point in a lot of ways. And as far as I can tell, this is unique to you. This is the first I've ever heard this coming out of somebody's. So you didn't get it from somewhere else.
I mean, I'm sure there are people who agree with me, but I mean, this is what I've kind of concluded.
Yeah, I
guess, from my own study.
This is something that's germinating inside of you organically. What's the dead wood? What's the thing with the scientific method that you think is throwing him? And I don't know if this question quite makes sense, but do you understand where I'm going with this?
Sure. Yeah, I do. So here's the thing. I think that Peterson, like a lot of academics of his generation and of the past couple centuries, generations really, have sort of developed this idea that science is about searching for the best naturalistic explanation of everything.
And only that.
And only that. Like that.
That's probably the problem, right? And only that.
Yeah. Right. And so, and I will even see some Christians who, they feel like, okay, well, on Sundays I'm a Christian, I go to church, but when I put my scientist hat on, I'm a methodological naturalist. And that's like the only way that I could be a good scientist, because that's what good science means by definition, is hewing to methodological naturalism. And William Lane Craig actually was trying, of course, Rebecca Goldstein kept interrupting them, so nothing helpful really happened here. But it could have been interesting if Craig had been allowed to push Peterson more on this. But Craig was kind of pointing out that Peterson is trying to stuff everything into a naturalistic framework. But I really don't think that works. I think the science, rightly understood, the scientific enterprise, is the search for the best explanation. Period.
Well, it's the search for truth. Period. It's the search for truth. Period. And that's why if I'm a person of faith and I'm actually, this is something I tried to explain to an atheist and didn't get anywhere. If I'm a person of faith and I actually had an experience of God that was real, and it's not in my mind, then science eventually will back me up, because if it's true, science will prove it out. The idea that science can't meet God is absurd. If I'm actually having a truth experience and I'm not just deluding myself, then science will ultimately find that truth out, because that's what science does.
Well, exactly. And also there's this idea that if you come, say, to the conclusion that life must have been intelligently designed, that it really looks like random mutation plus natural selection is just not going to get you there. It's not going to get you the variety of life that you see. That people say, well, that's unscientific. It's like, no, it's not unscientific. I'm looking at the evidence that this looks like the best explanation of the data, is that there's an active, intervening, intelligent mind behind all of this. And so to say, well, that's unscientific, is just to sort of make up the definition of scientific as you go along. So to use Paul Vanderklay's phrase, scientific has become a word that fudges, in that sense. And when you actually think about various scientific discoveries, for For example, when Newton came up with the theory of gravity, in his day, there was this idea that everything had to operate in a sort of push me, pull you way, like stuff pushing around other stuff. So Newton comes along and says, hey, guess what? Gravity is this long distance thing that just works, planets attracting each other. And they're like, well, is there like some kind of ether or something in between and stuff pushing other stuff? Nope. It just does that. Oh, okay. So in Newton's day, by the standards of the day, you might have said, oh, well, that's unscientific because we've decided that
scientifically not feasible because the science hasn't caught up to where the actual reality is. It's just like the idea that science rules out supernatural. Well, because we don't understand how to process it scientifically yet today, that doesn't mean we won't tomorrow. And that's where Peterson is the bridge. That's how I see it. Go ahead. John, do you have questions, by the way? Or the audience, if there's audience? I don't know if there is audience.
Yeah, well, we got somebody in the chat, the troublemaker, Dan, the deconverted man. He's
just ignore him. I want to hear what John thinks, so we'll ignore Dan.
Okay, so I'm interested in why you think that the best explanation then for let's say the biology of life it is not based within Darwinian evolution. Just I don't know, because I've heard you talk a bit about it on Twitter, but I wanted to actually get to kind of the better understanding. So like why do you think that there's things that Darwinian evolution leaves out of the picture? Like maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, so a big problem is the waiting time problem, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the research into this was sort of kicked off back in the 60s when a group of mathematicians got together, and as far as I know, they weren't like a Christian monolith or something like that. They were just like some of the world's most brilliant mathematical minds.
Mathematicians Ken Ham and Kent Hovind.
Exactly. Yeah, right. No, these were like one of these guys worked on the A-bomb, and one of these guys was Schutzenberger, who was a brilliant French physicist, I think. So they got together in the 60s and talked about basically why they, as mathematicians, were skeptical that random mutation plus natural selection could get us to where we are today. And so they were looking at DNA code, and they were thinking about this from like an information theoretic perspective. So, the analogy would be a bicycle lock that's a bajillion miles long, right? So to get exactly the right sequence of amino acids that's functional, that codes for life, well, what are the odds that you would have this happen successfully so many times in what looks like a logical, functional way? And so, they said, it looks bad. It looks really, really bleak because, think about taking a sentence of Shakespeare, say, methinks it is a weasel. Okay, now run some random changes on it and see if you can get to the sentence to be or not to be. Good luck, because random changes, they were talking about some things they had done with computer programming. It degrades, it doesn't get you anywhere helpful without a guiding intelligence behind it. And so like what Dawkins tried to prove, like with methinks it is a weasel, and he had that like as the target, and he wrote a program that would select for whatever was closest to that target. So he was like, aha, I proved it. It's like, but you were intelligently designing that program, Dawkins. Thank you. You proved our point.
Random process of nature.
Okay. So is that then more for the origin of DNA? That because I've seen like some of the talks from James Tour. He seems very knowledgeable on these types of things, and like he's quite persuasive at least from, I guess, from a layman's perspective on why the origin of life it does not yet have a valid scientific explanation at this point.
Well, it's part of that, but it also extends beyond that. So when you get into the protein structure, for example, the smallest unit of innovation, I guess you could say, is the protein fold. And so when you look at something like the Cambrian explosion, for example, and you look at just all of these like new body plans that seem to have kind of popped out without forebears. When you think about what it takes to build a new body plan, a new animal, and you get down to the level of the proteins, well, you need a lot of new folds. And so then you can run experiments on that and ask yourself, okay, well, how likely is it that you would randomly get as many folds as you would need to confer new function? And so there was a guy named Douglas Axe, and he and his colleague Ann Gauger did an experiment where they said, okay, let's take two proteins that are already really close to each other and see if we could change one of them into the other by doing some folds. And so they engineered some folds, and they couldn't do it. Like, even with two proteins that were already really close, they couldn't change the one protein into the other. And so it's just that the problem just gets worse and worse the more experiments that you run. And so that it's relevant not only to the origin of life, but also to the sort of progression of life and new body plans emerging, because in order to have new body plans, you need to have new protein folds to confer new functions.
It's funny because recently on Twitter, I've been hypothesizing, I guess, from, again, an extreme layman's perspective on how, through the selfish gene theory from Dawkins, it would, at least intuitively, or not intuitively, just from the explanation of the theory himself, it seems as if it would create a lot of false positives for what is actually going to be reproductive strategies. And so, like, certain strategies will be bred into future generations that actually have no correlation to gene fitness. I don't know. It was something I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I have no real, I guess, expertise in any of this. But if I'm understanding you, it might be similar to what I was talking about, how in order to actually have the actions, I guess, or sorry, it seems like there has to be some sort of either like guiding hand or future knowledge within the genes themselves, or whatever's guiding those genes, be it through the host of the genes, that the actual some sort of information data kind of that cannot be had a priori, I guess.
Yeah, although, I mean, future knowledge of the genes, I mean, at that point, I mean, David Stove is great at this, and I highly recommend his book, Darwinian Fairy Tales. I think I recommended this to you before. But Stove just sort of takes Dawkins apart. And he calls this the revenge of Paley. Paley was a 19th century Christian thinker who sort of came up with the famous watchmaker argument that you find a watch on the beach, and the most natural inference is that the watch was designed. And so then David Stove said that in reading Richard Dawkins, that Dawkins keeps talking about, well, the genes do this, and the genes want this. Stove was like, well, this is just the revenge of Paley, because here's Dawkins using this like really unrespectable language, so to speak. He's sort of,
he's smuggling in function within.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's like woo. And so Stove takes like a block of Dawkins' text and italicizes every word that has to do with purpose or function or teleology, and it's just ridiculous. And so Stove is like, well, okay, I'll just be over here waiting for the glossary that translates all of this into respectable scientific language for me. Take your time, And Stove's not a Christian. Stove was a sort of contrarian atheist guy, but he's like, this is just ridiculous. This is no progress has really been made here at all. Since Paley, really.
Yeah, it seems like all the new atheists that I see trying to debunk Paley always go at it from the understanding that it's talking about complexity rather than actual function, and like as you would find within design. So like a watch is complex, yes, that's true, but also a watch has a purpose of telling time, and so that's what the actual I guess argument is talking about, rather than this watch has tons of little mechanisms within it.
Well, right, exactly. Exactly. So that's like the difference between, okay, say I have like a really long random string of letters.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, is that a complex string of letters? Well, if it's just random gobbledygook, then, I mean, the only sense in which we could say it's complex is that there's just a lot of letters thrown together. But if it's a stanza of a Shakespearean sonnet, well, okay, now it's conveying information, you know, now that's conveying function. And so
Mhm.
that's where you go back to the problem of DNA. And it's a huge
Mhm.
problem.
Yeah. This is
John,
kind
do you
of
have
where-
the two
Yeah.
questions?
Oh yeah. Shoot, forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me. We had a somebody that wasn't going to be able to watch live, but they had questions.
You gave them permission to ask me questions in my DM.
Yes, I'm looking. All right, question 1.
Do you know who we're talking about?
Who is it?
Esther?
No, I don't think you put a name in it. Oh, CK, I guess.
Is she there? Where'd she go? Hello?
I'm here. Who are we?
Oh,
What are we talking about?
so you told some guy that he could DM me questions, and he's not going to be able to watch live.
Oh,
Somebody
yeah,
named
yeah.
CK.
Yes, Conrad Kitch. I didn't know what his
Yes.
question actually was, though.
Right, we have it. We're going to ask it to
Oh,
you.
good.
He DM'd
Go
me.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, send it to me.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
he's a fan.
I can read it off. Does he want it read out live?
Yes, just read it.
Okay. So, question 1: abortion was recently legalized in my country. The vote in favor was,
He's in Ireland, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah. The vote in favor was overwhelming, and I'm having difficulty adjusting to it. I cannot take part in public political activity as I work in law enforcement, and I swore to abstain from such a part on my oath, so my options are limited. Most of my family voted to legalize, and they are not at heart evil people, but I have difficulty not thinking about it when I see them. But my skin crawls, and I find myself getting angry, which makes it very hard to make a persuasive pro-life case. It is also making it difficult to love them as I should. Prayer helps a bit, but I'm really struggling with this, and I think it's hurting my ability to fulfill my duties as a son, a husband, and a father. What should I do?
Okay, so there are a couple of guys who have good resources on this. One sort of more generally on having difficult conversations with people, and one more specifically on having conversations about the pro-life issue. So I recommend a book called Tactics by Greg Koukl, and that's spelled Koukl. And so that's just about a way that you can, by asking questions, you could sort of draw a person out and have a conversation that hopefully doesn't turn into a disaster. And you know, that way you're not, you know, if it's a delicate situation, like a family situation, like he's talking about, you can find a way to talk to each other without feeling guilty, like maybe you're damaging the relationship. So that's a nice book. But specifically on the pro-life issue, there's a guy named Scott Klusendorf, and he has a lot of great resources on pro-life apologetics in particular. And so these are, you know, just ideas that you can pick up for calmly, rationally sort of laying out the pro-life case. And you know, but it's not, obviously it's not guaranteed. And I don't know Conrad's situation. I've been lucky to have a great relationship with my own family. And so I can't imagine what it must be like to feel like you can't talk to your own family. So that's exceedingly difficult. But yeah, I would definitely say pray a lot, and it probably is better for it to come out. You know, it's probably better not to just walk around letting this kind of bubble up, because if you do that, it's probably going to come out at the worst possible moment in the worst possible way, maybe over Thanksgiving dinner or so. Oh wait, they're in Ireland, they don't do Thanksgiving. Oh, Christmas dinner or something like that. And so probably it would be good to say, you know, can we talk? Because I feel really strongly about this, and I feel strongly that this is wrong, and I don't want to say that you're an evil person for voting like this, but I would really like to share more about what I think and share why I think my position is best. So, you know, if you're willing to hear me out on this, can we please talk? Because this is very important to me. That's also kind of what I recommend.
Also, I would say that be strategic. If ever I want to approach a difficult subject with my wife, I will lay the groundwork for that way months ahead of time. A little bit here, a little bit there, plant seeds, some subtle, some not so subtle, so that people understand where you're coming from before you have any conversation on the subject. So you prepare the ground for your take on it. Just casually mention, like, but I'm really not that cool with it. And then let it slide right then. Don't go into it then. Just plant seeds for your take on it so that your take gets heard, but people are prepared to understand where you're coming from. That's what I would suggest.
Excellent advice. Very good.
Okay, number 2, Jonathan.
Yep. All right. Also, I'm an atheist who came to the faith late, so my knowledge of it is patchy. I've read some Lewis and McGrath. Is the Alpha Course any good, or what would you recommend for an ordinary Anglican? Sorry, these are a bit dramatic, but Esther is, in particular, one of the smartest people I've ever read, and I would greatly appreciate a second opinion on these.
Well, okay, I feel embarrassed now because I don't know what the Alpha Course is. Do either of you guys know? What's he talking about there?
I think it must have something to do with Anglicanism. So,
okay. So I'm using. Thank you, Google. An evangelistic course which seeks to introduce the basics of the Christian faith through a series of talks and discussions. I have no idea. it might be really good. Can't hurt. But so Anglicanism in particular, he'd like resources on that.
Just whether or not you recommended it. But if you have like other texts or books that you would recommend for people just getting into the faith with kind of a hardly any background knowledge of it, it seems like with Lewis, that's a great one of the good starting points to have. Yes,
Lewis is an excellent starting point. Yeah, read everything Lewis ever wrote, and that'll be a nice starter pack.
That'll start you off
for sure.
And read your Bible. What are you doing? Read your Bible. Tell him to read his Bible.
That's I will say though, so throwing in one thing from a more specifically Anglican perspective, here's something from my heritage. So in my church, we use the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. So this is Thomas Cranmer. This is like the only correct way to do the Anglican liturgy in my not so humble opinion. Everything else is just like modernized crap. So the Book of Common Prayer it's really beautiful. It takes you through a sort of a little journey of the Mass, and so you go through the consecration of the sacrament and these prayers, and they're prayers of thanksgiving, prayers of confession, prayers of praise. So that's like an excellent little sort of encapsulation of what liturgy should be, what liturgy looks like. And so if you want a sort of window into that, cannot go wrong with the 1928 BCP. And it'll teach you how to pray, and there are these wonderful little collects. So there's like a collect for the morning, there's a collect for the evening. Just beautiful. They're not like frilly or fancy or overdone, but just excellent, honest, heartfelt prayers. So yeah, that's something that most people, I think, wouldn't come up with, but I will throw that out there from my Anglican perspective.
So cool. All right. John, did you have other questions about anything in general?
We haven't done impressions yet.
Yes, that's why I was getting
I think probably it seems like one of the core unique features about you, Esther, is how much you love Douglas Murray. And for someone that is only barely familiar with him through the Peterson discussions with Sam Harris, I'm curious, what about Douglas Murray do you absolutely love that you want everybody to, I guess, learn from?
Douglas. my unrequited love. Yes, for obvious reasons.
Well, so far unrequited. This is a public forum, so don't be.
So Oh my gosh, let me count the ways. So I mean, I love his, well, in his own sort of British way now, his sort of old Etonian way. He is another no BS kind of guy, you know, this another sort of don't give a damn. I'm just going to say exactly what I think, and, you know, let me finish my speech. You know, let me finish my point, and then he just demolishes you. So he's just, he's so excellently trained, and he has such a vast knowledge of history, and he's shrewd, you know, and he's sort of brutally honest about the particular problems facing England and Europe, which, you know, a lot of those have to do with Islam and the immigration crisis and that sort of thing. And you know, he puts so well, especially with touchy issues like immigration, the kind of hard truths that people need to face over on our side as well, I think, with Mexican immigration, that like there just is no free lunch. It's not like there's just only one compassionate way to look at this. And I think Douglas himself, like in his book, he's got a chapter where he talks about actually going and speaking with some refugees and hearing people's stories. It's a really beautifully written chapter because, you know, he gets it. Like, he understands some of these situations really suck, and it's messy and complicated and all black and white. But at the same time, he has what Thomas Sowell would call the tragic vision, or the constrained vision, that there are no solutions. You know, there are only trade-offs and compromises. So he articulates that really, really well. But at the same time, yeah, let's see, other stuff I love about him. Oh, well, you know, he's written, interestingly, this is an underappreciated aspect of his work, but he's really interested in the question of the sanctity of human life. And his problem that's sort of bugging him and keeping him up at night is, okay, I'm not a Christian anymore. Like, I can't really believe this stuff, but how do I ground the dignity of human beings? Because it seems like human beings have dignity. And, you know, it really bugs him when environmentalists talk about how people should all just die, basically. And he goes, no, like, I'm glad we're here. Like, there's something great about and glorious and mysterious about man, but where do I put all these feelings and instincts now that I don't have God anymore? That's a real problem. And so I call him, I think he's sort of an old-fashioned humanist in that sense, and I really love old-fashioned humanists because I think that they may not be all that far from the kingdom. So he writes about euthanasia, which is something I'm really concerned about, and just how disturbing it is that human life seems to have been really cheapened, particularly in Europe, and increasingly so in Canada and America. And so, yeah, I really appreciate his humanism and also his appreciation for the Judeo-Christian heritage of the West and how that's preserved in the beauty of cathedrals and Christian art and that sort of thing. Kind of like Roger Scruton, you know, he's the same way, even though I think Scruton may also be an atheist. And so then he also has that sort of tragic deconvert aura about him, you know, that like he really believed this stuff once upon a time, you know, he really wanted it to be true. And then he couldn't believe it anymore. But I think there's a part of him that still kind of wants it to be true. And in that sense, I don't think he lacks the glibness, I would say, that sort of typifies a guy like Sam Harris, who just grew up. Sam Harris just grew up in this California Hollywood bubble, you know, and he's just like, oh, Christians, herder, stupid fundamentalist people, and Douglas Murray is like, you don't know anything, man. you're just spitballing, because he brings that English heritage and the English liturgy, the King James, and man, I'm right there with Douglas because he grew up Anglican, I grew up Anglican, so we kind of share a common language in that respect. So yeah, I could go on and on forever about Douglas. I hope we get a chance to cross swords someday. That would be fun.
Yeah,
I mean, cool.
Yeah.
What are you gonna say? What are you gonna say?
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, it'd be very fun to see you two in the same room together.
So now, do you sing Billy Joel, or is your imitation? What is this Billy Joel imitation that I've heard dropped? Yeah. Word of.
So, this actually, it's gonna loop back around to Jordan Peterson in a kind of a fun way, because this is a story that Billy Joel told, because he's a great storyteller in addition to being a great singer. And it was when I was watching Peterson's video on why you need art in your life, and the transcendent experience of art. And that's what it's for, is just to kind of lift you out of yourself and connect you with something higher. And so I thought of this story that Billy Joel told, and you can look it up. It's hard to find, but it's from a Q&A, and the question that kicked it off was somebody asked, could you write a piece of music tonight? And so in the course of answering that, he went off on this digression about how he got stuck in a traffic jam one time. And so I'll try to let me try to sort of recreate a little bit what he's doing. So okay. as he's telling this story, he's standing by an electric keyboard, and so he's going to start sort of playing it while he tells this story. So it was around Easter time, which is one of those holy times of year, and I'm driving in my car, and the traffic is stopped, and so there's nothing to do but tune into the radio because the bastard in front of me is going like 5 miles an hour, right? So I tune into the radio, and this song comes on. It's called Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. And this is one of the saddest pieces of music ever. They used it in like Platoon and The Elephant Man because it was so sad. And it goes like this, na 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 na, and he starts playing it on the keyboard. And I'm not playing it right, but it keeps kind of building and building and building, da 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 da, and eventually it gets to this peak, and at just that moment, the sun shoots out of the clouds, and it stops raining, and the traffic clears, and I had to pull over. And I'm sitting there like bawling my eyes out. And I'm just like, what's happening to me? And so that this is the moment where I imagine Jordan Peterson coming in going, man, you're having a transcendent experience, eh? because that it's like this moment he's sitting there and it's raining and he's listening to this unbelievable piece of music and just all the feels, man. But then the moment when the sun breaks through and the music peaks and he just starts crying and he doesn't even know why. And that's kind of what Peterson is touching on. If you go back and you watch that little clip about art, he's touching on those moments where you don't even know where they come from, but you're just grateful to somebody. And see, John, here again, where do you put the gratitude, man? Where's this coming from? And, it's kind of like C.S. Lewis's argument from desire, Mm-hmm. So there you go. That's my Billy Joel impression.
Yeah, that's really good. That was a fun story. And how you...
I think I lost John.
Interesting ones.
Sorry, you cut out. Can you repeat what you just said there? Can you repeat what you just said? Because I think you cut out.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to say that C.S. Lewis's argument from desire is quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's especially well, I don't know. It's at least like the most, I guess, subjectively true or phenomenologically true ones out there, and so I think it works especially on that level.
Yeah, and it's not a knockdown proof. Mm-hmm. Like just because I want something doesn't like mathematically prove that it has to exist. But again, I think this goes back to the idea of natural law. This really, it seems programmed into us, for lack of a better word. What is this tending towards? Where's this pointing? I had one other thing in mind. Have you ever seen the movie The Soloist?
No.
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so it stars Robert Downey Jr. and Jamie Foxx, and it's based on a true story.
Oh, yeah. I have seen that, actually. It's been a while, though.
Right. So this homeless guy got kicked out of Juilliard, and he's schizophrenic and really messed up, but he's this cello prodigy. And so then this Los Angeles journalist finds him, and they become friends, and the journalist writes up his story. And so the local Philharmonic or whatever invites them to a special private concert. And so the cellist guy's name is Nathaniel, and he's just sitting there totally enraptured, like closing his eyes. He can't even believe that he's getting to enjoy this. And so then later, the Robert Downey Jr. character is getting drunk in a bar, and he's trying to tell his ex-wife about what this experience was like to sit there and enjoy this concert with Nathaniel. And he's like, I'm telling you, I'm watching him, and he's watching the music, and I'm thinking, my God, there is something higher out there. There's something higher. I don't even know what you fucking call it. And it's super noisy at the bar, and his ex-wife kind of smiles and goes, it's Grace. What?
Oh, wow.
Grace. Oh, Grace. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So same deal, same idea, right? It's grace. It's sort of God is trying to tell you something. That's what I would say to Billy. It's what I would say to Jordan. It's what I would say to you, John.
What did you actually? That's what I would say to John Buck. That's what I was just going to say. That's what I say. Come on, John. Feel him in your heart, John. Feel him in your heart. What did you actually try that when you talked to Peterson?
Oh no, I mean I didn't have time. I think basically, so the way I phrased my question to Peterson was, and I think maybe the point of the question got a little bit lost in his answer, but what I was trying to ask him is, do you think, well, similar to what the Haaretz journalist was asking in a way, because I said, do you think that do you think that there is enough hope in what you're kind of laying out in your project of acting as if? Do you think that there's enough hope to go on with, so to speak? Because it seems like there's utility in the idea of a final restoration of the things that we can't restore, and a final, reckoning or a judgment for all the evil that we're not able to avenge, and all the people we can't help. I mean, one of the clips of Peterson that just did me in was when a guy wrote in and said, our daughter committed suicide. So what advice do you have? And Peterson just starts crying. It just tears him up, because he doesn't really have, what can he say? It's devastating. We walk among tombstones. We spend our lives. Yeah. And so then it's Christ saying, I am the resurrection and the life, and he that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And that, you can't beat that. You act as if doesn't cut it, by comparison with that. And so then that's what I want him to find, in a sense, is that it's good to weep over death, because death is not natural, and that's why Jesus takes time to weep with Mary and Martha first, before raising Lazarus from the grave. And so, when Peterson is weeping, when he hears stories like that, Jesus is weeping too, but then it's not the end. There's the eucatastrophe, as Tolkien puts it. There's the becoming untrue of sad things. And so I hope he discovers that. I hope he finds that someday, because I think that's what he's looking for. It's like the U2 song. He still hasn't found what he's looking for.
There's a story I'll tell that's related to this. When my wife used to work at a real estate here in Malibu, and one of the women's daughter killed herself. And yeah, it was unbelievable. And we went to the funeral. See, the thing that you said about Peterson being authentic actually struck me in this moment, because we went to the funeral and there was a standard Christian preacher, and he took the opportunity to start talking about, like, sin and actually witnessing to the people there. And it was really awkward. It was really poor form, and everybody noticed it. Like, they knew that me and my wife are really big Christians in her office. And then, some of them had been leaning a little our way and, like, telling us in private, like, I think it's really good that you guys are Christians, things like that. But then when we went to the service, and here was this really profoundly terrible moment, and this guy didn't grapple with it at all on any type of a human level. He just used it as a stepping stone to be like, to give basically a speech about sin, and it was really bad. It was really, really counterproductive.
I can just imagine. Yeah. No, that's not helpful at all. You have to be present with people in that moment, you know. And I mean, look, I think suicide is a sin. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that.
No, he wasn't saying that. He wasn't saying suicide is a sin. He was talking about like just a standard like. Yeah, just a standard, like, it was almost like an evangelical feedback loop. Like, you know, sin is like when a skunk sprays you with, that's what sin is. And then when you go meet Jesus, he washed. It was one of those type of things. And I was like, oh my God, this is so.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was so not appropriate. It wasn't like he was really torn up that of the sin of suicide. Because there were some people who were legitimately angry. And I respect that, at least, you know, like that's an extraordinarily terrible thing to do to other people.
Sure.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate to say that in the moment, but I respect that opinion. No, this wasn't that. This wasn't that at all. This was just like a standard. I have a captive audience because they won't be in church, so let me do a standard.
Oh my God, that just sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, it was bad.
But yeah, you know, I have this kind of image in my mind, this sort of little archetypal picture, I guess, of like Peterson in a graveyard, and it's like he's kneeling by a particular tombstone, let's say, and you can use your